Good morning, everyone. I am very proud to announce or to present this panel here for the One Day Immersion Conference. With ARRIS, we're in a sweet spot of technology. We actually, all the great experiences that you're hearing about, from the cloud to the network through the home, is all powered by ARRIS. You know, there's not one piece of equipment that's probably in each one of those spaces, from out in the cloud, in our networks, through to your homes, that we probably don't touch some piece of that equipment there to bring the experience to you. So we are very proud to bring this panel of technology experts, I have to say. We have a very diverse panel here. You have our vendor programmer, we have a vendor represented, we've got our programmers represented, as well as we just talked about communication, so you have a writer. Jeff Baumgartner is probably the premier writer in our cable industry. Everyone wants to be written by them. If there's not a story in Multichannel News about you on any given day, you should feel bad about yourself, because Jeff is
lay the guilt on me.
An awesome writer, so that is why he is here with us today, to lead us through this conversation, because you have actually four, not just a moderator here who's a great technology writer, but you have four great technology people here who have grown up in this industry, and they not only they went in with one set mindset with their career as far as what technology was about at the time, but as you know, technology expands, it grows every day, is moving at the speed of light, and they have had to adjust their careers, their education, and their knowledge to be able to keep up with that. So in that vein, I'm very happy to introduce the Innovation and Entertainment, where creative meets technology. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Zanita. Appreciate it. Again, I'm Jeff Baumgartner. I'm honored to be here today and moderate this panel and kind of help you guys out. And the title is Creative Technology Driving the Industry's Innovation. And we have some folks on the panel here who are kind of in the, like you said, the sweet spot of what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to try to cover as much ground as we can today. And I'm happy to be joined by a great panel. So to my right, we have Craig Cuttner, the Senior Vice President of Advanced Technology at HBO. And next to him, Mark DePietro, the Vice President, Strategy and Business Development at ARRIS. And Tamara Franklin, the Senior Vice President, Affiliate Operations and New Media Distribution for Scripps Networks Interactive. So, like I said, a diverse panel. And to kind of tee things up a little bit, Motorola Mobility, actually that's where Mark kind of came out of lastly, but released a study in March. We're going to talk a little bit about viewing trends, TV trends, and how they're kind of affecting the pay TV industry. But there were like 9,500 consumers in 17 countries, and they looked at some new and emerging content trends that took a look at multi-screen and kind of how the pay TV industry is changing as a result. So one of the interesting things about it was that consumers are watching about 25 hours of TV programming and film content per week, and TV viewing was actually rose from 10 hours in per month, I think, in 2000 or per day in 2011 to 19 hours this year. And actually, I don't think that's a day. If I could do TV viewing for 19 hours a day, I would like to have that job.
Multitasking is really catchy.
Yeah, it's like I can just cram my old job into 4 hours and sleep. So there's a lot of talk about how consumer behavior is changing in terms of different screens they're using, how they watch content. But the trend is actually having an increasing effect on how much content we're all consuming, and that makes a lot of sense, I think, since we now watch almost as much content on the go as we can get from home. So I guess the viewing of our content is increasing, but it's just becoming a lot more fragmented. So those are just some of the items I wanted to kind of bring up as we get started, since they'll kind of tie into some of the topics that we're going to try to cover this morning. But to start off, I thought we could maybe just go around the horn a little bit and ask everybody on the panel to offer a little more detail about what you do now at work, and maybe a list of your top 2 or 3 priorities right now. So, Craig, go ahead.
Okay. Advanced technology at HBO is an interesting niche because it's a creative company, and from a career guidance perspective, it's something that creatives don't care about. So we just make things happen magically, and that's the top.
You have a wand? I mean,
that's right. In some cases, it requires pixie dust. In some cases, when you're dealing with Washington, it requires a lot of pixie dust. The things keeping keeping us up is just basically stay relevant. I mean, technology over time has been very good to HBO in terms of innovation, leading, following, and making those choices very pragmatically. We're not always the leader in doing something first. There's the difference between the bleeding edge and the cutting edge, but part of our job is to make sure that the right technology is available at the right time with the right associated risks for what the industry and our company needs to have available. So that's like job one. And job two is all of the ancillary things in the industry that make things work. In some cases, that's standards efforts. Perhaps the most dry thing you'll ever do is sit for a week with a bunch of engineers and work on the arcane details of how packet protocols work and how content gets moved around. That is a key issue in the industry, though, because in the programming industry, if you think about it, we have to send out our signal to thousands of cable head ends, and we can't do it 1,000 different ways. There's a cost trade-off of how that works. So the standardization effort is actually pretty key, and in some cases it's a technical thing, in some cases it's a negotiation thing. And lastly, there is the policy side. Our friends down Amtrak have lots of agendas, and they need constant supervision to make sure that they're not doing things that are detrimental. In some cases it's informing them, in some cases it's meeting with them and just saying, you know, if you thought about it a little more, you wouldn't do it that way. And sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't, but you know, so those are the three major buckets for us.
Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
So just a show of hands, how many people have heard of ARRIS coming into today? ARRIS employees don't count. So how about Motorola? Okay, just wanted to make sure. So April of this year, there was a marriage between Motorola Mobility, which was the home division, which makes cable TV equipment, everything from set-tops inside your home to encoders that encode the signals, send them up over the satellite links from HBO, to various control systems that the customers operate to turn off HBO if you haven't paid for it. And ARRIS, a company that was making similar equipment. So now the combined company is the new ARRIS. And in very simple terms, as Anita said, we make all three forms of equipment. We organize ourselves, we think of the home, where we make cable TV set-top boxes and cable modems, the cloud, where we are making innovations in the way that, for example, the electronic program guide is delivered, and the network, which is all the plumbing that kind of goes in between to help the bits get from here to there. And if I were to talk about what we're doing kind of generically as a priority, in the industry there's a transformation IP occurring, and it's occurring over a very long period of time. But if you look at the very first cable systems that got put out, it was back in about 96, 97. And it was based on broadcast technology and MPEG-2. So you take one signal and everybody gets the same signal. And then eventually, a few years later, video on demand emerged around 2000. And that's when people started to be able to get things on their own time. A couple of years later, DVR started to explode. And then the internet came. And now, in the beginning, the internet wasn't really fast enough to deliver good, high-quality television, but of course it is now. So some of those same technologies that are being used over the top are ultimately being incorporated into traditional networks with customers like Comcast, for example. And it's manifesting itself in many ways. And delivery of content to multiple screens is a priority for a lot of the companies. There's more than one way to do it. There's a bit of, I'll say, a religious debate about what's the best way to do it in the industry. There always are some number of religious debates going on. One school of thought would suggest that you could do it from the home by putting a gateway in the home, a giant set-top box that has multiple tuners that can then take that content and send it around to your iPad, wherever you may be. We're working on that kind of technology. And then also doing it from the cloud. So no matter how you want to do it, we're trying to make equipment to help facilitate that process. And I'm going to actually answer one of the previous questions because I thought it was kind of fun. What are you watching on TV? Because Gwen and I were just talking about this. I think there's a relatively new phenomenon of binge watching. So after some of the announcement awards from a few months back, I decided I needed to watch Breaking Bad. And I had not watched one episode of the thing, but It took me about 5 weeks. I watched the whole thing. I have to figure out how to work out while doing it, though, because it's very difficult. And now the latest one is Orange is the New Black. I got one more episode left, and I think so anyway, binge watching.
Good morning. Thank you guys for coming out. My esteemed colleague Kathleen Finch was on earlier, and so she talked about we're with Scripps Networks. We own lifestyle brands like HGTV, DIY, Food, Cooking Channel, Travel Channel, and Great American Country. As a programmer, really, our product is our content, right? And you are our viewers. So really, our priorities all focus and are centered around obsessing over you, quite frankly. Obsessing over where you engage with us today and how you might engage with us tomorrow and 10 years out, right? When you're kind of in that 25 to 49 demo where advertisers love you as much as we do. So really we think about where are you consuming content today? How are you consuming content? What are your options? And then what are you going to do 10 years from now and 20 years from now when you're starting your families and you're fully immersed in your professional lives and incomes are higher, where your patterns change from the way you engage with our content today. And we need to make sure that we're ready to meet you there. So we think about all the technologies, all the various distribution opportunities and alternatives that you'll have and what that means to us in terms of how we get our content from point A to point B and the different business models that might evolve as a result of that. So all of our priorities really fall out around obsessing over our viewers.
Great, and maybe since Mark brought it up and it came up on the other panel, tell us what you're watching other than like the shows that are on your own network. I mean, as I assume you're watching more than HBO, even though it's got great stuff and you guys have great stuff. But what's kind of one of your favorite shows, and how has your viewing behavior changed?
Lots of fragmented. First off, I commute, so there's this big bucket of consumption that's podcasts. Technology podcasts are just, sort of go into the brainstem, and I just listen to them. But in terms of real consumption, I will say I'm a big fan of things like Mike Holmes, although I would say that HGTV is the all-Canadian network. So just about every show they have is produced with a tax credit from some Ontario government. But a lot of those sort of things, although I do time shift with my wife, and she has a DVR full of stuff that I'm obliged to watch. So a lot of that is network television fodder, but basically that's it.
Yeah, I am definitely in mourning over Breaking Bad. There's no doubt about it. Love that show. So off network, Breaking Bad's big. Doug mentioned Scandal. Obviously, that's a tough one too. I try. Watching TV can be such a commitment. You get so just absorbed in the programming, and some of the storytelling is just amazing these days. It's better now than probably it's ever been before. So it's tough with the time consumption. I've got 2 teenage children, so it's just very hard. So.
Right. And I've probably done a little bit of binge viewing as well. Same thing. I had to get caught up on Breaking Bad, and these days for me it's just starting to get into American Horror Story, I think it's called, which is bizarre. I mean, I'm just kind of like getting through the first season, and it's you don't want to watch it with the lights out, but I kind of I catch some on the tablet as I get ready to settle in for the night. So, but the other thing we want to talk about, since we're here to talk about careers. So, let's talk a little bit about your different career paths. How did you break into the industry? I mean, was it cable, pay TV? I mean, was that your chosen path, or were you like me and kind of? I'll tell you my story, but just kind of stumbled into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I probably shouldn't share this, but it's one of those things when you hear all these Ivy League stories and stuff. After I flunked out of engineering school. I went back and got an undergrad degree that was sort of an undergrad MBA kind of thing. A lot of business, a lot of, everything from accounting to, And I worked my way through college. The coincidence was at a TV station in Atlanta. So props for Georgia Tech and props for what is now a Fox affiliate, it wasn't then. And pulling camera cables, just doing things where I raised my hand, to Kathleen's earlier point, I raised my hand and said yes to everything and took risks, and in fact almost got fired over one weekend rewiring the station so that they could do a special effect that had never been done before, and I forgot to undo that for Monday morning. So that was not a good scene. But the crusty old chief engineer who had been in the television business forever said, "Kid, you need to go to New York." And I sent my resume to the network in New York, had a plane ticket 2 days later, came to New York where I had never been before, went through 4 interviews and had a job at CBS, and never looked back. Worked my way through advanced technology. I've never bought a shrink-wrapped product in my entire life, but I've always been very careful about mitigating the risks of getting something that needs to be on the air, but never quite sure at the last minute whether it's really going to work or not. And so that led to HBO, and that was basically organic. I don't know that there was a plan that I could have followed to do that, but it was more about the attitude, the can-do attitude of doing any job, even if it was things like intercoms, which try to do a television production without intercoms, but everybody wants to do the sexy job. Everybody wants to be creative. They want to do all the, they want to be a news reporter. They want to do that sort of stuff.
That's a sexy job?
It is.
Oh, I didn't know
well,
that.
I don't want to say sexy because I still keep in touch with her, but when I was driving a news truck in Atlanta, Deborah Norville was the intern on my truck.
Okay.
So
I see where you're going.
She did okay.
So my story is Professor Franklin, and I went to undergrad school at RPI in Troy, New York, where it's very cold. Up north a little bit from here. And there was a room, it was very much like this, except that you had to, from the entrance, you had to come down 30 steps to get to the stage, and they had these old-fashioned projectors that you put the transparent pieces of film on, and that's how they get, anybody ever see those? Mm-hmm. Young enough to, or old enough to see those things? So anyway, Professor Franklin would always show up about 3 minutes late, and he would sprint down these 30 steps, like 3 or 4 at a time. I always thought he was going to fall. And then there was like this rail that he would like hurtle over to get to the 2 projectors. And while he would hurtle over and like do a half twist in midair and land and plop the first 2 transparencies on the film, turn the light on, and then turn around and say, "Good morning, everyone." And I'm thinking, this guy is nuts. But he was a brilliant professor. And I decided, I need to get to know this guy because there's something very special here. So I kind of went and I volunteered to clean his office or do whatever was needed, and I ended up doing some hiking with him on in the Adirondacks. And the guy moved fast in the mountains too. And I was like 19 years old. I thought I was in good shape, and this guy was 40 at the time, and he just blew me away. So in any event, I ended up getting a job in the lab there at the RPI image processing lab. So this is very early in the days of computer graphics where 3D really hadn't been figured out yet and all that sort of thing. That ended up, through a connection of his, getting me a job at an Air Force base where they were looking at taking aerial photographs, digitizing them, and then figuring out over time what was changing and then trying to infer what was going on in those areas. It's like that same technology now is actually going into the BMW i8 supercar to figure out that's a deer up there, that sort of thing. But in any event, that led to me deciding that I kind of liked this image processing area, and I also decided I wanted to be out in California, so I ended up taking a job at Hughes Aircraft and worked on radar, video, signal processing, and that sort of thing. From there, went to a very small company that was kind of, Hughes was a giant company at the time. There were probably 35,000 people in this one facility in California. From there, I went to a 10-person company, and that was a lot of fun. And we ended up actually getting some contracts where we beat out some of the big, 10-person company beats out the 30,000-person company. And I got close enough to video technology through some of those contracts and decided I wanted to move back east that one day I'm reading an article in Popular Mechanics about the advent of digital cable. Didn't exist yet. And I see this guy's name, Dario Santana, who worked at General Instrument at the time, and I said, I'm going to call him up, tell him I think I can help him. And so I did. I figured out how to get in contact with him because, sending a resume into the HR department it doesn't cut it, right? You have to find a way for people to get to see you as distinct and know who you are. And Dario hooked me up with Mark Kaufman, who just retired, very trailblazing engineer in our industry. And after that, I've been here at one company or another after acquisitions for the better part of 20 years. So I think the key thing is start by looking to someone that could be a mentor or someone that you think you want to be like. I think some of the other panelists said that before, and that'll kind of take you in a direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat the great career advice you guys got from that first panel, but a few things that would jump out would be, Doug talked a lot about the plan and having a plan, and I think that's really important. But if you notice, he also talked about being smart enough to recognize opportunities in that plan that suggests deviations might be your best path, right? So the plan is kind of like your North Star. You don't need to follow it to the T because you really have no idea where you're going to be 20 years from now. But at least it gives you some guidance around what you definitely don't want to do. If you have no interest in legal, you don't need to take any routes that require being an attorney to be successful, right? So that plan is kind of like a North Star. Kathleen talked a lot about the sales. She talked a lot about the English and communication. I agree with that, because if you couple that with the young lady who was talking about being in sales, those are two things that you're going to use everywhere in your career every single day, right? You're always selling. Whether it's internally or externally, you're selling an idea, you're selling a concept, you're selling your next career step. So any opportunity to work in sales, I think, will be helpful to you. I worked for sales as my first job. I was an English major, worked in newspapers for Knight Ridder newspapers, and my first job was advertising sales. English major, again, communication, she's absolutely right? To convey an idea succinctly with clarity and enthusiasm is something you're going to do internally and externally every single day. You're having to communicate those ideas. And it becomes harder and harder to get an executive's attention or a customer's attention in a meaningful way. So being able to communicate is really key. I would also say, whether you're in technology in terms of your academic background is as a technologist or not, you really need to be comfortable with technology if you're going to stick around in this industry for a while. It changes rapidly. I am not an engineer. I worked for Motorola for 7 years, went there strategic planning after I worked for Bain & Company for a while, and I love the engineers. Embrace them, spend time with them. You may never understand everything they're talking about, but they love to talk about it, and all you need is to be dangerous, right? Sufficiently dangerous. So spend a lot of time with the engineers. Technology is very important.
Just be sure to use that articulation skill to translate what the engineers say to real English to talk to real people.
And they'll love you for it. If you can move their ideas forward, they'll love you for it.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why I need people like you to kind of translate for me, because it's kind of hard to turn into a news story for outside of the engineering group, like that you're not just using jargon and lingo, and it's like just gobbledygook to most people. So, but that's like a skill of its own. So, for me, I kind of I did get my degree was in journalism, so you'd think I had this well-established plan, and I ended up being a journalist, but it didn't really start out that way. I graduated from Colorado State. I was doing TV and broadcasting and radio, and did an internship, and discovered pretty quickly kind of this contract basis that these people live under. And I was coming in, and there was this guy, Bob, and he's there, and then 2 days later, he's not there. It's like, well, what happened to Bob? Oh, his contract was not renewed, so he just was gone. I'm like, oh, well, I don't know if that's really, doesn't sound like a lot of stability, so I'm gonna, kind of maybe try a different path. And I started to learn about the cable industry, mostly because there was a company called Jones Intercable. They're still there, the building's still there, but it was a very pretty, shiny building. And I was like, that sounds like there's money being made in this industry. And so I was kind of drawn to it. That's how deeply I was thinking at that point. And ended up, just kind of getting in as a temp, working in the tax department of all places, but, spent a lot of time getting to know people on, the PR and the marketing side. And, it was about establishing relationships. Then when an opportunity came up, something eventually came my way, and, off I went and ended up where I am now. So, now one thing we wanted to talk about was, technology and kind of the pace of change. So, how do you guys keep up? Because I have a heck of a time trying to figure out what's going on, and every time I think I kind of have it figured out, everything's different. So, how do you keep up in your job?
Well, part of it is debunking the myths. I mean, if you think of a lot of the startups and things where they are either disruptive or just making stuff up, part of it is understanding fundamentally how technology works, to the point of, the cable infrastructure that's been around forever the physical plant has gone from coax to hybrid fiber coax, but effectively the underpinnings of it still are the same. They've added a lot of new things to it, like two-way and stuff. But being familiar with how the basic technology works and using that as a fundamental growing point from all the cool things that people are pitching, if you know how the basic system works, you can then debunk a lot of the claims made or find out something that's really cool and innovative. But that's part of the trick that I've used is being an insatiable magnet for new knowledge. Your publication is good for that. But a lot of the don't read at face value what you see. Question it. How does it work? How does it really work? How is this going to be implemented practically in an industry that's sensitive about capital expenditures, sensitive to the consumer? You could do all kinds of cool new user interfaces until you realize that if you confuse the 87-year-old women who are sitting at home with their remote control and they call, the economics of that phone call tanked the whole concept. So you have to be really careful about the application of technology in the environment that it's in.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can read the technology from some, just highly technical journals and magazines and things, and that's great because it just says we can do it. But I think what you want to ask, you want to take it a step further and say, but what is the implication, right? What does that mean? If this were to come about, what's the impact on the business? Does it fundamentally change the business model? Does it make it less expensive to do something or more expensive to do something? Does it stand a likelihood of increasing consumer adoption, or is it, to your point, require significant behavior shift in consumers, and therefore it probably won't happen for 5 to 10 years, right? There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of press, and a good deal of it we won't see in our lifetimes. Some of it we see cycle through, like 3D. Every 5 to 7 years, 3D is the hottest new thing, and it goes away and comes back again. So you just have to take it the next step and really think about it in terms of what is its implication.
And the only thing I'd add, because I think those are spot on, is talk to a lot of people who see things from a different perspective, because, to the point that Craig made, you get this technology guy that has this wonderful idea from a technical perspective, but then failed to recognize that, well, that'll never work because that'll disrupt this other thing where there's a vested interest that it will try to kill it, right? So, and by talking to a lot of people, you get to be a little bit lazy because you might not have to read so much. You can basically go pick someone's brain that's an expert in something. So make a habit of talking to people and picking their brains.
Okay. Now we have maybe 5 minutes left, and I don't want to take up all the questions, but I want to open it up a little bit here and see if anybody in the audience has a question to pose to the panel. Go ahead.
Yeah, this one's for you. I was just wondering, today with what someone called the digital revolution and citizen journalism, what advice would you offer to somebody who maybe would be a bit discouraged about becoming a journalist?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Like, you're kind of saying I'm in a dying industry now. Well, I think one thing, and I think it came up in the first panel, is being able to write clearly is a skill that can be used in journalism, but in all aspects of industry. So I think developing that skill could be used for that if there are jobs available. But one thing I've kind of seen in the industry is, yes, it has kind of gone to this electronic form, and the amount of money being paid to journalists, especially some just coming out of school, is very low. But I would if I was coming out of school right now and kind of pursuing a journalism degree, I would definitely focus on publications with electronic distribution and the highest amount of traffic, because there are a lot of sources of information, and obviously you can't trust everything out there. But I would try to focus on the the bigger players out there if you can. I mean, that's that's going to be a function of actually trying to obtain a job there. But it's going to be a challenge, and it's a tough industry right now, because our publication still has a print component, but a lot of it's electronic, and we're also doing a lot of events. So you're going to end up having to be a little more diverse in terms of what you can do instead of just writing. You're going to be able. You're going to need to be. You're going to be able to. You're going to need to be able to do video, do different sorts of distributions of information. So I think you have to really diversify your playbook. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead. Okay. So the question was, yeah, can you briefly explain an innovation at your company and how you went about it?
Well, I'm trying to think of where to start. I guess you could say HBO Go, which was, an evolution over time. It's been in the works for a long time. It just needed the right combination of bandwidth technology for client devices and the encoding technology for our library of content, which is immense. That eventually rolled out and then needed the negotiation piece, because in some cases it was viewed as threatening. I mean, there was a whole discussion that we could have gone down about TV everywhere, where it's positioned both as an opportunity and a threat. And I think that the HBO Go product threaded that very, very careful minefield, if you will, of the right technology, the right time, but with the right business relationship. Disruption may be good if you're going to flip a company with a VC, but it's not good if you have a sustained long-term relationship with both the customer, the distributor, the content industry, et cetera. I mean, disruption doesn't, at the end of the day, except for some public offerings or stock flipping, it doesn't help anybody really.
From a programmer perspective, we're looking at, as I mentioned earlier, ways of getting our content to you that are a little more innovative. The traditional television cable platform is good for what it does, but it requires a great deal of scale to make sense financially. And so as a lifestyle brand, you can imagine there are lots of other things besides food, home, and travel that we'd like to bring out to audiences like yourselves, but we don't think that it would make sense on the scale of the traditional cable business. So we're looking at innovative ways to create and distribute that content to you that is more cost effective.
So some of the things that you'll see from us and that you're seeing now are these gateways that have multiple tuners in them. So right now you'll see like the dish hopper that has multiple tuners. The cable companies are starting to roll those out too. And then in addition to being able to serve multiple TVs in the home from one box, the technology is evolving to the point where you can put transcoding capabilities into those devices as well. And what that gives you the ability to do is to serve your content not only up to TVs, but then also to iPads and other devices at the same time. And the format that those devices want looks significantly different than the format of the content as it's coming down to you on the cable wire. So that's just one example of what we're doing in the general area of supporting multiple screens different ways.
Yeah. And I've been very thankful of a company you're working with, Sling Media, right? Because I moved from Denver to Philadelphia a few years ago, so I'm a Broncos fan, and so Philadelphia doesn't really care about the Broncos too much, and you don't get a lot of unless it's nationally carried, you're not going to hear a whole lot. So I think the last thing I did before we moved is I put my Sling box on a little used TV at my parents' house in Denver, so that I could still tune into the Bronco games. I have to watch it on a PC screen, but at least I can still. I don't get left behind. So we might have.
Do you have a second to know ask them about TV Everywhere? I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, first of all, yeah. Who's raise your hand if you've heard of the term TV Everywhere. Okay, all right. And I know we were going to ask a couple questions. So now keep your hands up. How many of you know what TV Everywhere means? At least how it's being defined. A couple people. So what? We'll figure that out. What is the?
Has anyone used a product? I mean, I know you're aware of what, but has anyone used HBO to go or Watch Food Network or easy to use, hard to use? Raise your hand if you thought it was pretty easy and intuitive, or if it was difficult.
Remember your credentials. That's the big question mark. Do you remember your credentials?
All right.
They will if it's Facebook.
Yeah.
They probably won't if it's your account number for your cable provider.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm being told that time is up, so I really appreciate you guys having us here, and to thank our panel for their great insight. Thank you.